Hey there. Before we begin tonight's journey, go ahead and get comfortable. Adjust your pillow. Pull up that blanket. Maybe dim the lights or turn them off completely. If you'd like, you can hit that like button and subscribe. But only if it feels right. No pressure. Tonight, we're going to step back in time. Not to witness grand battles or sweeping political changes, but to spend time in one of the quieter corners of the medieval world. We're going to walk through the herb garden of a monastery. We'll move slowly through the seasons, watching the same plot of earth change month by month. We'll meet the gardeners who tended these plants. We'll learn their routines, their knowledge, their patience. This isn't a story of excitement or drama. It's a story of repetition, of small tasks done carefully, of knowledge accumulated over lifetimes and passed down through generations. So settle in, let the fire crackle in the background, and let's begin our time in the garden. The year is somewhere around 1320. The exact year doesn't matter much in a place like this, because the work changes little from year to year. The monastery sits in the countryside of what we might now call central France, though the people here would simply call it home. The stone buildings are solid, cool even in summer. The chapel bells mark the hours. And behind the main buildings, tucked against the southern wall where the sun lingers longest, lies the herb garden. It's not a large garden by modern standards, perhaps 30 paces long and 20 wide. But within this modest space grows an entire pharmacy, a kitchen, and a library of living knowledge. Raised beds divide the garden into sections. Narrow paths of packed earth wind between them. A small well stands in one corner, its bucket worn smooth by countless hands. A tool shed, barely large enough for 2 people, leans against the wall. This is where we'll spend our time. Not rushing through, not hurrying to the next moment. Just being here. Watching the work. Understanding the rhythm. The day starts before dawn. It always does. Brother Thomas has been the monastery's herbarius, the herb gardener, for 15 years now. He's perhaps 40 years old, though age is measured differently here. More by the work one can do than by years counted. His hands are stained green and brown. Soil lives permanently under his fingernails. His back aches most mornings. But then again, whose doesn't? The bell for matins rang an hour ago. The monks have prayed in the cold chapel while the world was still dark. Now, as the first grey light begins to soften the eastern sky, Brother Thomas walks across the wet grass toward the garden. His sandaled feet leave dark prints in the dew. His breath makes small clouds in the cool air. He wears his working robe, the one that's been patched many times, the one stained with soil and plant juices that will never wash out completely. Spring mornings feel like this, cool, damp, full of possibility. The garden is still mostly sleeping, but not for much longer. In a few weeks, the real work will begin. For now, Thomas does what he does most mornings. He walks through the garden slowly, looking, just looking. Not to find problems, necessarily, though he'll note those if he sees them, but mainly to understand, to know his plants, to sense what they need. He unlatches the wooden gate, simple, made from oak planks bound with iron, and steps into the garden proper. The hinges creak slightly. They always do. He's oiled them a dozen times. But the damp air always wins eventually. The sound is familiar, comforting even. The garden greeting him. He walks between the raised beds, their edges made from woven willow branches, packed with soil built up over decades. The willows for these edges are replaced every few years as they rot. It's continuous work, this maintaining. Nothing stays fixed. Everything requires attention, repair, renewal. Each bed holds different plants, grouped by purpose or by the conditions they prefer. The bed nearest the well holds plants that like moisture: mint, watercress, comfrey. The beds in the sunniest corner, against the south wall, hold Mediterranean herbs that want warmth: lavender, rosemary, sage. Thomas knows each plant not just by name, but by touch, by scent, by the particular way its leaves catch the morning light. This knowledge didn't come quickly. It came from years of watching, years of small failures and quiet successes, years of the listening to Brother Anselm, the previous herbarius, who taught Thomas everything before his hands grew too stiff to work the soil. Brother Anselm had been a patient teacher, never rushing, never showing frustration when Thomas made mistakes. And there had been many mistakes in those early years. The time Thomas had pulled up what he thought were weeds but were actually valuable herb seedlings. The time he'd harvested feverfew at the wrong stage, when its medicinal properties were weakest. The time he'd watered the Mediterranean herbs too much, nearly drowning them. Anselm had simply shown him the correct way, explained the reasoning, and trusted Thomas to learn. And Thomas had learned, slowly. The way you learn anything worth knowing, through repetition, attention, and time. The garden is still mostly bare now, in early April. The perennial herbs are just waking up. Tiny shoots of tansy push through the dark soil, each one curled like a green question mark before it unfurls. The lavender bushes show new growth at their woody bases, the grey-green leaves just beginning to emerge. The sage looks grey and tired after winter, but if you look closely, which Thomas does, you can see the fresh green leaves emerging, small and soft, surrounded by last year's leathery foliage. These old leaves will drop away naturally as the new growth strengthens. This is the time of year for clearing away the old, for making space for the new. Thomas will spend the next several weeks cutting back dead stems, pulling early weeds, turning the soil in beds that will be replanted. It's repetitive work, the kind of work that allows the mind to wander, or to rest, or to pray. Many of the brothers find God in the chapel, with its soaring arches and coloured light. Thomas finds God here, in the slow work of caring for growing things. He stops at the bed where the feverfew grows. This plant has been here longer than Thomas has been gardener, longer than Anselm before him. Perhaps since the garden was first established 50 or 60 years ago. The feverfew forms a low mound of delicate, fern-like leaves. Later in the summer, it will produce hundreds of small white flowers that look like tiny daisies. The brothers use it for headaches, for women's complaints, for fevers, hence the name. It reseeds itself eagerly, spreading its offspring through the bed. Thomas allows this, but only to a point. Too much of any plant throws the garden into disorder. Order, balance. These are the principles that guide the herb garden. Not the rigid order of a military formation, but the gentle order of a well-tended ecosystem. Each plant needs space, but not too much space. Each needs neighbors, but not neighbors that will overwhelm it. The gardener's job is to maintain this balance, year after year, making small adjustments, learning from mistakes, building knowledge. Thomas kneels beside the feverfew. His knees press into the damp earth. He can feel the moisture seeping through his robe, cold against his skin. But this is part of the work. You can't tend a garden while trying to stay clean and dry. He pulls a few early weeds, their roots sliding easily from the soft soil. Chickweed, mostly. It's always the first weed to appear in spring, spreading its small oval leaves in tangled mats. Some people eat it, and it's harmless enough, but it has no place in the medicinal beds. He loosens the earth around the fever-fused base with his fingers, careful not to disturb the roots. This kind of work doesn't require tools, just attention, just care. The soil is cold, almost clay-like in its heaviness, still holding winter's moisture. In a few weeks, as the weather warms and the days lengthen, this same soil will be easier to work, crumbly, alive with earthworms, smelling sweet and fresh. The sun is higher now. The grey light has become golden, slanting across the garden from the east. The monastery's stone wall casts a long shadow across the western beds. But the eastern beds are fully illuminated now, the young plants practically glowing in the morning light. Somewhere in the monastery, the bell rings for prime, the first of the day's prayer services after matins. The sound carries clearly in the still morning air. 6 measured strokes that echo off the stone buildings. Thomas brushes the soil from his hands and stands slowly, his knees creaking slightly. He's aware of his body in a way he wasn't when he was younger. The aches that appear each morning. The stiffness that takes an hour or two to work out. The way cold mornings make his fingers clumsy. These are just facts, not complaints. Just the reality of being 40 years old and spending your life in physical labor. He'll attend prime, then break his fast with bread and weak ale. The morning meal is simple, taken in silence in the refectory, while one of the brothers reads from the rule of Saint Benedict. Thomas will eat quickly, efficiently, his mind already on the day's tasks. Then he'll return to the garden. There's always more to do, always something that needs attention. But that's not a burden. That's the rhythm. That's the life he's chosen, or the life that's chosen him. Sometimes he can't remember which. It doesn't matter. This is where he belongs. In this garden, with these plants, doing this work. Before he goes, Thomas walks the perimeter of the garden one more time. This is habit, ritual almost. He checks the wall for damage. Loose stones, cracks where rain might penetrate. He examines the woven fence that separates the poisonous plants from the rest of the garden. He looks at the tool shed door to make sure it's properly latched against animals. He glances at the well to confirm the bucket is in place and the cover is secure. Everything is as it should be. The garden is safe. The plants are beginning their yearly awakening. The work will continue, as it always has, as it always will. Thomas walks back toward the monastery buildings, his shadow stretching long before him in the early morning sun. Behind him, the garden waits, patient, quiet, ready. Let's take a moment to understand the layout of this garden more fully. To really know which plants grow where and why. To understand the thinking behind every choice. Because this isn't random. Nothing in a medieval monastery garden is random. Every choice has been made deliberately, based on centuries of accumulated wisdom, passed down from gardener to gardener, refined through countless seasons of trial and error. The garden is divided into several distinct areas, each with its own character, its own purpose. Near the entrance, closest to the main buildings and most easily accessed, are the culinary herbs. These are the plants the Kitchen Brothers use daily, sometimes multiple times a day. This placement makes sense. The Kitchen Brothers are busy men, always rushing to prepare the next meal, and they don't have time to walk to the far corners of the garden. Here grows parsley, both the flat-leaved variety preferred for cooking and the curled variety used more for garnish and decoration on feast days. The parsley beds are replenished every year with new seedlings. Parsley is biennial. It grows leafy the first year, flowers and produces seeds the second year, then dies. For maximum leaf production, Thomas grows it as an annual, pulling it up after one season and starting fresh. Lovage stands tall in the culinary section, its hollow stems thick as a man's thumb, its leaves compound and glossy. The whole plant smells strongly of celery, and indeed it's used in much the same way, chopped into soups and stews to add depth of flavor. The monastery's cook, Brother Peter, values lovage highly. He claims a stew without lovage is barely worth eating, though he says this about many things. Brother Peter is passionate about his work. Summer savory and winter savory grow in adjacent beds. They're related plants, used similarly, but with different growing habits. Summer savory is an annual, growing quickly from seed each spring, producing abundant tender leaves through the warm months, then dying at the first frost. Winter savory is a woody perennial, slower growing, with tougher leaves but able to survive the coldest winters and provide fresh greens even in January. The monks use both, depending on what's available. Fennel towers over many of the other plants, its feathery leaves catching the slightest breeze and moving in waves. The whole plant is useful. The leaves add a delicate anise flavor to fish dishes. The stems can be chopped and cooked like vegetables, and the seeds, collected in late summer, are valued both for cooking and for medicine. Fennel seed helps with digestion, relieves gas and sweetens the breath. Coriander grows here too, though the brothers know it by various names depending on which part they're discussing. The leaves are sometimes called cilantro, though more often they're just green coriander. The seeds are always called coriander seeds, and they're used extensively in bread, in wine, in various dishes, and as medicine for stomach complaints. These culinary beds are the most frequently visited part of the garden. Several times a day, Brother Peter or one of his assistants will hurry through the gate, knife in hand, and quickly cut what's needed for the next meal. In summer, when everything is growing vigorously, these plants are cut so often they barely have time to grow tall, but that's fine. That's what they're for. The frequent cutting actually helps them, makes them bushier, produces more of the tender leaves the kitchen needs. A plant left to grow tall and flower is putting its energy into reproduction rather than leaf production. By cutting regularly, Thomas and the Kitchen Brothers trick the plants into staying in their leafy vegetative state. Beyond the culinary section, taking up the largest portion of the garden, lies the medicinal area. This is the heart of the garden, the reason Brother Thomas's position exists. Medieval medicine relies heavily on plants. The monastery's infirmarian, Brother Raymond, depends on a steady supply of herbs to treat the various ailments that affect the monks and the local people who come seeking help. Brother Raymond is younger than Thomas by perhaps 5 years, but he's been infirmarian for nearly as long as Thomas has been herbarius. They work closely together, their knowledge complementary. Thomas knows how to grow the plants, when to harvest them, how to preserve them. Raymond knows which plant helps which ailment, in what form it should be prepared, in what dosage it's safe. Together, they maintain the monastery's medical capability. The medicinal beds are extensive and diverse. Here grows sage with its grey-green leaves and square stems that mark it as a member of the mint family. Sage is used for everything from sore throats to fever to improving memory in the elderly. The Latin name, salvia, comes from salvere, to save, to heal. The plant is considered so valuable that there's an old saying Thomas learned from Anselm. Why should a man die who has sage in his garden? Of course, men do die, sage or no sage. But the saying speaks to the plant's reputation. Rue grows in a contained area, its blue-green leaves distinctive, its smell sharp and unpleasant. Roots is powerful medicine, used carefully for headaches, to bring on delayed monthly courses in women, to improve eyesight according to some authorities. But it must be used carefully. Too much rue causes vomiting, dizziness, dangerous complications. Thomas harvests it with caution, and Raymond dispenses it with even greater caution. Wormwood grows nearby, even more bitter than rue, its silvery leaves beautiful despite the plant's harsh nature. It's used for digestive complaints, to expel intestinal worms, hence the name, and as a general tonic. Like rue, it's powerful and potentially dangerous. A little wormwood tea might settle an upset stomach. Too much might cause convulsions. The line between medicine and poison is sometimes very thin. Hyssop flourishes against the sunny south wall. Its square stems and small leaves characteristic of the mint family. In summer, it produces spikes of blue flowers that bees love. The plant is used for coughs and chest complaints, prepared as a tea or syrup. Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. The psalm is well known to the monks, and they use hyssop both medicinally and symbolically, for physical and spiritual purification. Ile-Campagne stands tall in a bed that gets good drainage, its large leaves and yellow flowers marking it even from a distance. This is a plant grown primarily for its roots, which are harvested in autumn, cleaned, sliced and candied with honey. The resulting confection is both medicine and treat, given for coughs, lung ailments, and chest weakness. The roots have a warm, slightly bitter taste that the honey balances well. Betony grows in several locations, its toothed leaves forming low rosettes before sending up flowering stalks in summer. This is one of the most valued medicinal plants, used for headaches, joint pain, digestive issues, and dozens of other complaints. There's another old saying, sell your coat and buy betony ads. The plant is considered nearly miraculous in its applications. Self-heal, with its purple flower spikes, spreads through several beds. As its name suggests, it's valued for wound healing. Fresh leaves are crushed and applied to cuts and scrapes. The plant is common enough that it sometimes grows as a weed beyond the garden. But Thomas maintains a good supply in the medicinal beds to ensure it's always available when needed. Comfrey grows in the dampest part of the medicinal section, its large, hairy leaves distinctive. The plant is called knitbone in the local language, and it's used exactly as that name suggests, to help broken bones heal. Crushed comfrey leaves are mixed with other ingredients to make a paste that's spread on cloth and wrapped around fractures. Whether it actually helps the bones heal or simply provides support is debatable. But the treatment is traditional and trusted. Marshmallow grows near the comfrey, also preferring damp soil. The plant produces pale pink flowers in summer, but it's the roots that are valued. Marshmallow root, when boiled, produces a mucilaginous liquid that soothes irritated tissues. It's used for sore throats, coughs, and digestive inflammation. The modern confection called marshmallow was originally made from the root of this plant, though today's marshmallows contain no actual marshmallow. The medicinal beds are arranged by the conditions the plants prefer. This is practical necessity rather than choice. Mediterranean herbs, sage, lavender, thyme, hyssop, cluster together in the driest, sunniest spots, usually in raised beds along the south-facing wall, where they get maximum sun and good drainage. These plants evolved in climates with hot, dry summers. They actually perform poorly if given too much water or too much shade. Their leaves are often small, sometimes covered with fine hairs, adaptations to conserve moisture. Northern herbs, self-heal, betony, comfrey, marshmallow, occupy the damper areas, often in beds that are slightly lower, where water naturally collects. These plants come from regions with cooler, wetter climates. They have larger, thinner leaves that can make use of abundant moisture and need protection from the hottest sun. This isn't just convenience. This is the only way to successfully grow such a diverse collection of plants in one space. You give each plant the conditions it evolved to thrive in. Fighting against a plant's nature is exhausting and usually unsuccessful. Working with its nature makes the gardener's job much easier. Against the back wall, where the monastery's stone structure creates shade for most of the day, and where the soil stays coolest and dampest, grows the small collection of plants that prefer such conditions. Sweet woodruff spreads slowly here, its whorls of leaves and tiny white flowers appearing in late spring. The dried plant smells of new-mown hay, sweet and pleasant. It's used to scent linen, sewn into small sachets and placed in storage chests. On special occasions, it flavors wine for celebration, though the monks rarely indulge in such festivity. Primrose grows in this shaded section, valued for its early spring flowers, bright yellow appearing when most of the garden is still dormant, and for its roots, which some authorities claim help with paralysis and joint pain. The flowers are edible and sometimes appear in salads on feast days, bringing early spring color to the table. Longwort thrives in the shade. Its spotted leaves, thought to resemble diseased lungs. According to the doctrine of signatures, this means the plant must be useful for treating lung ailments. And indeed, lungwort is used for coughs, chest congestion, and breathing difficulties. Whether it works because of some actual medicinal property, or because belief in the doctrine makes it work, Thomas doesn't know. He simply grows it, harvests it, and provides it to Brother Raymond. The doctrine of signatures. Let's pause there for a longer moment. This is one of the fundamental theories underlying medieval herbalism. The belief is that God, in his infinite wisdom and mercy, has marked plants with signs indicating their uses. A plant with heart-shaped leaves must be good for the heart. A plant with red sap must be good for blood disorders. A plant whose roots resemble a human form, mandrake being the most famous example, must be powerful medicine for human ailments. Yellow flowers suggest the plant is good for jaundice. Plants that grow near water are cooling and moistening. Modern medicine would dismiss much of this as superstition. And in some cases, it clearly is. The shape of a leaf doesn't determine the plant's medicinal properties. But the interesting thing is that sometimes, just by coincidence, the correspondence happens to be true. Lungwort, with its spotted leaves, actually does contain compounds useful for respiratory ailments. Eyebright, whose flowers supposedly resemble bloodshot eyes, does help with eye inflammation. Walnuts, which look somewhat brain-like when you crack them open, do contain compounds that support brain function. Whether God marked them, or whether it's coincidence, or whether centuries of trial and error led people to remember the correspondences that happened to be true and forget those that weren't, we'll leave for others to debate. What matters here is that Brother Thomas and the other gardeners believed it, and that belief shaped how they organized and understood their gardens. The doctrine provided a framework, a way of making sense of the bewildering diversity of plants and their properties. It was, in its way, a scientific theory, a way of predicting which unknown plants might be worth investigating. In one corner of the garden, separated from the rest by a low woven fence painted with red ochre, a warning, grows a small bed of plants that require special caution. The fence is about knee-high, no real barrier to someone determined to enter, but that's not the point. The point is the warning. The painted fence says, "These plants are different. Be careful here." Monkshood grows in this section, beautiful and deadly. Its deep blue flowers, appearing in late summer, are shaped like a monk's hood, hence the name. The plant is also called wolfsbane, because wolves can be killed by meat laced with its juice. Every part of the plant is poisonous. Even handling it with bare hands can cause numbness. Yet in tiny, carefully measured doses, monkshood can slow a racing heart, reduce fever, ease certain types of pain. Brother Raymond uses it very rarely, and always with extreme caution. Henbane grows here too, its sticky leaves and strange veined flowers giving it an unsettling appearance. The plant smells unpleasant, and livestock instinctively avoid it. In proper doses, henbane can relieve severe pain, calm anxiety, help with sleep. In slightly larger doses, it causes hallucinations, delirium, and death. The line between effective dose and fatal dose is razor thin. Black hellebore, another dangerous plant, occupies a corner of this bed. Its dark green leaves are evergreen, persisting through winter. Its white or pale pink flowers appear in late winter or early spring, sometimes pushing through snow. The plant is used for mental disturbances, for purging the body of bad humors, for a variety of serious conditions, but it's violently poisonous if used incorrectly. The purging it causes can be so severe it kills the patient. Thomas checks this poisonous bed carefully whenever he's in the garden, not because he worries about the plants escaping, though some, like henbane, do seed themselves eagerly, and he must vigilantly remove any seedlings that appear outside the bed, but because he worries about visitors. A curious child from the village, brought by a parent seeking medicine. A desperate person seeking to harm themselves or another. An ignorant traveller, thinking the pretty blue monkshood flowers might be edible. The fence is as much a warning as a barrier. Everyone associated with the monastery knows what the red painted fence means. Stay out. Don't touch. Danger. Thomas has never had anyone poisoned by these plants in his 15 years as gardener. He intends to maintain that record. Finally, near the garden's entrance, convenient for frequent harvests, several beds hold what we might call utility plants. These aren't food and aren't medicine, at least not primarily. They're grown for other purposes that help the monastery function. Soapwort grows in a substantial bed. Its roots contain saponins, natural soap-like compounds that create a gentle lather when crushed in one. The monastery uses soapwort for washing delicate fabrics that would be damaged by the harsh lye soap used for most cleaning. The illuminated manuscripts in the scriptorium are sometimes cleaned with soapwort solution when they become soiled. Hair can be washed with it, though the monks' simple tonsures require little maintenance. Woad grows in 2 large beds. This plant is cultivated for the blue dye it produces. The process of extracting the dye is complex, smelly, and best done far from the main monastery buildings. So much of the work happens elsewhere. But the plants are grown here, their leaves harvested multiple times through the summer, then taken to the dye works. The dye colors the rough fabric of the monks' working robes, the blue varying from pale sky to deep midnight depending on the concentration and the number of dippings. Madder grows nearby, its sprawling stems covered with small hooked prickles that catch on clothing. Madder is grown for its roots, which yield a red dye ranging from orange-red to deep crimson. The roots must grow for 3 years before they're ready to harvest. So Thomas maintains a rotation, harvesting a section of the madder bed each year, while other sections continue maturing. Fullest teasel occupies a smaller bed. This tall plant produces egg-shaped seed heads covered with stiff, hooked bracts. When dried, these seed heads are used in the monastery's small textile workshop to raise the nap on woven wool cloth, creating a softer surface. Eventually, the teasel heads wear out and new ones must be grown. It's a continuous cycle: grow, harvest, use, grow again. These aren't glamorous plants. They don't heal the sick or flavor food, but they're essential in their own way. The monastery aims for self-sufficiency as much as possible. Everything needed should, if feasible, be made here, grown here, produced here. The herb garden is one piece of that larger effort. As morning moves toward midday, Thomas works his way through all the beds. He's not doing heavy labor today. That will come later, when the soil is drier and the plants have grown more. Today he's assessing, planning, noting which beds will need more compost, which plants didn't survive the winter and will need replacing, which weeds are emerging and will soon need attention. He carries a small wax tablet and stylus. The tablet is made from 2 wooden boards connected by leather hinges, with a thin layer of dark wax poured into each board's recessed surface. The stylus is a simple pointed instrument of bronze. Thomas scratches notes to himself, the stylus carving through the wax to reveal the lighter wood beneath. The notation is simple, abbreviated, often just marks that would make sense only to him. Comfrey, divide. The plant has grown too large, too crowded. It needs separating into smaller clumps. Sage, prune hard. Last year's growth is excessive, making the plant leggy and unproductive. Feverfew, thin seedlings. Too many baby plants are competing in too little space. North bed, more manure. The soil there is exhausted, producing weak growth. This isn't formal record keeping. The monastery's official garden records are kept by the prior, in the scriptorium, in carefully inked Latin on precious parchment. Those records note major events: what was planted, unusual weather, significant harvests, problems encountered. Thomas's wax tablet is for daily reminders, for thoughts that will be erased tomorrow and replaced with new thoughts, and erased again the day after. The wax can be smoothed with the flat end of the stylus or warmed slightly by the fire, erasing everything and creating a fresh surface. The bell for sext rings. Midday. The sun is high overhead. Thomas crosses himself and walks back toward the monastery buildings, leaving the garden to its growing. He'll attend the midday prayers, then eat the main meal of the day. Bread, pottage, perhaps cheese if it's not a fast day. Then he'll rest briefly, as all the brothers do during the hottest part of the day. And then he'll return to the garden. There's always more to observe, more to plan, more to understand. The garden remains under the noon sun, silent except for the occasional bee, the occasional bird, patient, waiting. Late April now. The garden has awakened fully. The bare beds of a few weeks ago now show green in every direction, almost overwhelming in their sudden vitality. The perennial herbs have leafed out completely. The annual seeds planted in early spring have germinated and are pushing through the soil, their cotyledons, seed leaves, followed quickly by true leaves. Everything is growing with that particular enthusiasm unique to spring, when the soil is warm and moist, when the days are lengthening rapidly, when the whole world seems to be racing towards summer. This is the busy time, the time when the garden demands attention every single day, sometimes several times a day. Thomas rises before dawn, as always, but now, instead of just observing and planning, he works. The spring tasks are many, and they all need doing now. While the weather is mild and the plants are young and manageable, weeding, always weeding. This is perhaps the most constant task in any garden, but especially in a medieval monastery garden, where there are no modern tools, no landscape fabric, or plastic mulch, no herbicides. Just hands and a simple hoe and vigilance. The weeds grow faster than the cultivated plants. They always have. They always will. This is the nature of weeds. They're successful plants. Opportunistic, adapted to disturbed soil, quick to germinate, quick to grow, quick to set seed and spread. Thomas weeds every bed at least once a week during the growing season, and some beds need it more often. He works methodically, starting at one end of the garden and progressing systematically through each bed. He kneels on a piece of folded sacking, an old grain bag that's worn thin but still serviceable, to protect his knees from the stones and damp earth. His fingers work quickly, finding weeds by feel as much as by sight, pulling them before they can set seed. Some weeds are simple to remove. Chickweed, with its sprawling stems and small oval leaves, pulls free easily, roots and all. Each plant can produce thousands of seeds, so removing it before it flowers is essential. Shepherd's purse, named for the heart-shaped seed pods that resemble the small bags shepherds carry, comes up cleanly if you catch it young. Others are more stubborn. Dandelion, that persistent invader, has a deep taproot that breaks if you pull too hard, leaving a piece behind that will simply regrow. Thomas has learned to use a small pointed trowel bolt for these, digging down beside the root, loosening the soil, then pulling carefully, trying to get the whole root. Even then, he's not always successful. A broken dandelion root left in the soil means the same job again next week. Couch grass is particularly vicious. It spreads through underground stems called rhizomes, creeping through the soil, sending up new shoots every few inches. Pull up one shoot and you haven't solved the problem. The underground network remains, ready to produce more shoots. Thomas has to dig carefully, following the rhizomes, pulling out as much of the underground structure as possible. It's time-consuming, frustrating work. Couch grass has probably cost him more hours than any other single weed. Bindweed, the gardener's particular enemy, appears in early summer and quickly becomes a nightmare. Its twining stems wrap around everything. Herb stems, stakes, even neighboring weeds. The stems grow impossibly fast, sometimes several inches in a day. And the roots go down deep, impossibly deep. Thomas has dug down 2 feet, following a bindweed route, and still not reached the end. You can pull up all the visible growth, and the plant will simply send up new shoots from that deep root system. For bindweed, Thomas has developed a strategy of persistence. He can't eliminate it, but he can weaken it. Every time a shoot appears, he pulls it, immediately, before it has a chance to develop leaves and photosynthesize and send energy back down to the roots. Pull it every day if necessary. Eventually, over weeks or months, the root's stored energy is exhausted and the plant dies. Probably, hopefully. Until a piece of root gets brought in with the compost or a seed arrives on the wind, and the battle begins again. Thomas has learned patience with weeds. He knows he'll never eliminate them completely. That's not the goal. That's not even possible. The goal is balance. Keep them controlled enough that they don't overwhelm the herbs. Pull them before they flower and set seed. Break their life cycle wherever possible. Accept that weeding is not a task that's ever finished, but a continuous practice like prayer. The pulled weeds go into a large basket woven from willow. When the basket is full, Thomas carries it to the monastery's compost heap, a sprawling pile behind the stables where all organic waste gradually breaks down into rich, dark humus. The compost heap is substantial, perhaps 20 feet long, 10 feet wide, 6 feet tall at its peak. It steams gently on cool mornings, the heat of decomposition visible in the air. Everything returns to the soil eventually. The weeds, the kitchen scraps, the stable bedding, even the contents of the privy. Everything has value. Everything can be transformed. This is one of the fundamental principles Thomas has learned from gardening. Nothing is truly waste. Everything is simply matter in transition. Today's garbage is next year's fertility. Thomas has a system for the compost heap. Fresh material goes on one end. As it breaks down, he turns it with a pitchfork, moving it toward the other end. By the time material reaches the far end, it's been turning and decomposing for 6 months or more, transformed into dark, crumbly humus that smells like forest floor, earthy, rich, alive. This finished compost is what feeds the garden. After weeding comes thinning. The seeds planted in early spring have germinated thickly, too thickly. This was intentional. You never know how many seeds will actually sprout, so you plant generously. But now the tiny seedlings are crowded, competing for light and space. If left alone, they'll all be weak, stunted, unproductive. They need room to develop properly. Thomas moves through these beds with careful fingers, pulling out the excess seedlings. It feels wasteful at first, especially in lean years, when every plant seems precious. But it's necessary. Better to have 10 strong, healthy plants than 50 weak ones. The remaining plants need room to spread their leaves, to develop good root systems, to mature properly. He works systematically, thinning each row to the proper spacing. For parsley, about 6 inches between plants. For lettuce, 8 to 10 inches depending on the variety. For carrots, grown in a small bed for Brother Raymond's medicinal use, just an inch or two between plants. They don't need much space, and the monastery doesn't need many carrots. Some of the thin seedlings are salvageable. Lettuce seedlings, for instance, can be transplanted to extend the harvest. Toma gathers these carefully, keeping a bit of soil around their tiny roots, and plants them in a prepared bed, spacing them properly, watering them gently. Some will survive the transplanting, some won't. That's expected. Transplanting always causes some shock, and young seedlings are delicate. But even if only half survive, that's half more lettuce than they'd otherwise have. Other thin seedlings are too delicate to transplant. Carrots hate being moved. Dill and fennel, with their long taproots, rarely survive transplanting. These simply get added to the weeding basket. More material for the compost heap. The cycle continues. Then there's staking. Some herbs grow tall and need support, especially in this climate where summer storms can bring powerful winds and heavy rain. Fennel, which can reach 6 feet in a good year, will flop over without support. Angelica grows even taller. Elecampane sends up flower stalks that tower over everything else. Evening primrose, grown for its roots and flowers, gets leggy and prone to falling. Without support, these plants will topple in the first strong wind or heavy rain, crushing smaller plants beneath them, creating disorder in the bed, sometimes breaking their own stems and ruining the harvest. So they must be staked. Thomas uses simple stakes cut from the monastery's woodlot. Straight pieces of hazel or willow, about as thick as his thumb, pointed at one end with a knife. He pushes these firmly into the earth beside the plant, deep enough that they won't pull free in wind. The stakes are neither beautiful nor sophisticated, but they work. He ties the growing stem to the stake with strips of soft fabric torn from worn-out robes. Nothing goes to waste in the monastery. A robe that's too tattered for wearing, even for work, is torn into strips. Some strips become ties for staking. Some become bandages for the infirmary. Some become cleaning rags. Some are eventually composted when they're too worn for any other use. Everything has a second use, a third use, a final use, before it returns to the earth. The tying must be done carefully. Too tight, and the stem is constricted as it grows, potentially damaging the plant or cutting off the flow of nutrients. Too loose, and the tie provides no support. The plant can slide up or down within the loop, still flopping in the wind. Thomas has developed a particular way of tying, learned from Brother Anselm, who learned it from Brother Martin before him. A loop around the stake, then a gentle figure 8 around the stem, then back to the stake. The figure 8 allows the stem to expand as it grows while still holding it secure. This work is meditative in the truest sense. The repetition of it, the rhythm. Select a stake. Push it into the earth, feeling for stones or resistance. Tie the stem with careful movements your hands know without conscious thought. Move to the next plant. The sun warms your back. The breeze carries scents from the flowering herbs. Your hands move automatically, guided by years of practice. Your mind can wander, or rest, or pray. Many of the brothers find this the best time for prayer. Not the formal prayers in chapel, with their Latin words memorized from childhood, their ancient melodies sung in unison, their prescribed structure and timing. but simple personal prayer. Conversations with God amid the growing things. Requests, thanks, questions, silence. Thomas prays as he works. Sometimes with words, sometimes without. A sense of gratitude for the good weather. It's been a mild spring, not too wet, not too dry. Perfect for plant growth. A request for help with his aging father, who lives in the nearby village and whose health is failing. A quiet acknowledgement of the beauty around him. The way the light catches the new leaves, making them almost translucent. The smell of the warming earth, the hum of the first bees discovering the early flowers. The bees. The garden comes alive with them in late spring. The monastery keeps several hives, managed by Brother Ambrose, whose official title is Custos Apium, Keeper of the Bees. Brother Ambrose is an old man now, perhaps 60, ancient by medieval standards. He's been keeping bees for 40 years and knows their ways intimately. He speaks to them, tells them about important events in the monastery. When the abbot died 2 years ago, Brother Ambrose went to each hive and informed the bees, asking them not to leave in sorrow. This is traditional. Bees must be told about deaths, births, marriages. They're part of the monastery's family. The bees need the garden's flowers. The garden's plants need the bees. Another balance. Another reciprocal relationship. The herb flowers provide nectar and pollen. The bees pollinate the flowers, ensuring seed production. Everyone benefits. This interconnection is one of the things Thomas loves about the garden. Nothing exists in isolation. Everything affects everything else. The herb flowers are diverse. Some are showy, the bright yellow of elecampane, bold and cheerful. The purple spikes of lavender, which will appear later in summer, beloved by bees. The pink umbels of valerian, clustered in flat-topped arrangements. Others are subtle, the tiny white flowers of thyme, so small you might miss them if you're not looking carefully. The modest blooms of self-heal, purple but small, close to the ground. The pale yellow clusters of wormwood, not meant to attract pollinators but producing pollen nonetheless. But all are visited by bees. All contribute to the hive's productivity. Brother Ambrose has explained to Thomas how different flowers produce different honey. Lavender honey is pale and delicate. Thyme honey is rich and complex. Early spring honey, from willows and primroses, is mild and light. Late summer honey, from the garden's diverse flowering herbs, is dark and strong. Each has its character, its particular virtue. Thomas leaves some plants to flower that he might otherwise have cut back. He coordinates with Brother Ambrose to ensure a steady succession of bloom throughout the season. This requires planning. Early spring flowers, pussy willow from the trees near the stream, primrose from the shaded garden edges, dead nettle that grows wild around the monastery. Late spring, borage, which self-seeds enthusiastically, and Thomas tolerates for the bees' sake. Comfrey with its hanging bell-shaped flowers, sage beginning its first flush of bloom. Summer, lavender of course, the bees' particular favorite. Hyssop with its deep blue spikes. Marjoram spreading its tiny white and pink flowers. Late summer, goldenrod from the meadows beyond the garden, chamomile producing wave after wave of daisy-like flowers. The various asters that grow wild but that Thomas has transplanted to the garden's edges. Autumn, ivy flowers, one of the last sources of nectar before winter, growing on the monastery walls. It's all connected. The garden affects the hives. The hives affect the garden. The garden affects the kitchen and the infirmary. The infirmary affects the local villagers' health. The villagers provide labor for the monastery's fields during harvest. The fields provide food for the monks. The monks pray for everyone. The villagers, the travelers, the sick, the dying, the king, the pope, all of Christendom. The cycle continues, season after season, year after year, each part supporting the others. Mid-May brings warmer weather. The risk of frost has passed. The tender annual herbs that couldn't be planted earlier, that would have been killed by even a light freeze, can safely go in the ground now. Basil, that most tender of herbs, which turns black at the slightest touch of cold. Summer savory, quick-growing and productive. The last succession of lettuce and cress, planted now to provide harvest in June and July, when the early plantings are finished. Thomas prepares their beds carefully. First, he weeds thoroughly. No point planting into a bed full of weeds. Then he works in compost from the heap, turning the dark, crumbly material into the soil with a spade. The compost is ready now, transformed over the winter and spring from garbage and manure into something valuable. It smells earthy, rich, full of promise, not unpleasant at all. The smell of growth, the smell of fertility. This is what feeds the garden. Not just the rain and sun, though those are essential, but this, the recycled life of previous seasons, the weeds pulled last year, the kitchen scraps from last autumn, the stable bedding from all winter, all broken down, transformed, made available to this year's plants. It's alchemy, in a way, base materials transformed into gold, or into green growth, which is perhaps better than gold. Thomas works the compost in thoroughly, turning the soil to a depth of perhaps 6 inches, mixing the compost evenly throughout. His spade is old, its wooden handle worn smooth by decades of hands, its iron blade polished by countless encounters with soil. It fits his hands perfectly, balanced and familiar. He's used this same spade for all 15 years of his service as herbarius. It will probably outlast him, be used by the next gardener, and the one after that. When the bed is prepared, weeded, composted, turned, raked smooth, Thomas makes straight furrows with a hoe. The hoe is another simple tool, iron blade fixed to a wooden handle. But in skilled hands, it can do remarkable work. Thomas draws it toward himself in steady pulls, creating shallow trenches, spacing them precisely. The spacing is important. Too close and the plants crowd each other, competing for light and nutrients. Too far apart and space is wasted, and weeds move in to fill the gaps. The traditional spacing for most herbs is about 8 to 12 inches. This isn't written in any manual Thomas has seen. Such things are rarely written down. This is knowledge passed from gardener to gardener, refined through centuries of observation and practice. 8 to 12 inches gives each plant enough room to develop properly while using space efficiently. Thomas sows the seeds thinly, trying not to waste them. Seeds are precious. Some come from the garden's own plants, collected last autumn and stored through winter in clay pots in the cool, dry tool shed. These are free, in a sense, though they represent the labor of last year's cultivation. Others are obtained through trade with other monasteries. A batch of this monastery's superior sage seed exchanged for another monastery's lavender seed, both monasteries benefiting from the exchange. Still others are purchased from traveling merchants at considerable expense. Exotic seeds, especially those from Mediterranean herbs that don't set seed reliably in this cooler, wetter climate, can cost more than a monk's shoes. A small packet of sweet basil seed might cost several days' worth of Egyptian monastery's income. So seeds are never wasted. Never sown carelessly. Each one represents value, investment, potential. Thomas taps the seeds from his palm into the furrows, spacing them as evenly as his experience allows. For basil, perhaps 20 seeds per foot of row. For summer savory, slightly more densely. For lettuce, quite thickly, knowing he'll thin them later. His fingers move automatically, the rhythm learned over years. Tap, 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 move forward slightly, tap, tap, tap. After sowing, Thomas covers the seeds lightly with soil. He uses his hands for this, drawing soil over the furrows, patting it down gently. The depth is crucial, too deep, and the seeds can't push through. Their stored energy runs out before they reach light. Too shallow and they dry out before they can germinate. The rule of thumb, passed down from Anselm, is about twice the seed's diameter. A tiny basil seed barely covered. A larger fennel seed buried deeper. This rule isn't written anywhere. It's not in Dioscorides or Pliny or any of the ancient authorities. It's knowledge that exists in practice, in gesture, in the feel of soil between your fingers. This is how most garden knowledge works. Not written, not formalized, just practiced, refined, passed along. He waters the newly planted beds carefully, using a wooden bucket to carry water from the well. The bucket is old oak, darkened by water and age, its staves bound with iron hoops. It holds perhaps 2 gallons, heavy when full. Thomas carries it to the bed, then uses a gourd dipper to apply the water gently. The water must soak in, not run off. The emerging seedlings must have moisture, but not so much that they rot or are washed away. Finding this balance is part of the gardener's skill. Too little water and the seeds won't germinate, or will die as tiny seedlings. Too much water and they rot, or the soil becomes waterlogged and oxygen-starved. The right amount keeps the soil consistently moist, but not soaking, allowing the seeds to swell and sprout and send down roots. Thomas waters in the evening when he can, after the heat of the day has passed. Water applied in the cool evening has all night to soak in, to penetrate deep. Water applied in the heat of midday evaporates quickly, wasting the effort of hauling it from the well. This is another piece of practical knowledge, learned through observation and passed along. The work continues day after day. By late spring, Thomas is in the garden most of the daylight hours, leaving only for the canonical hours of prayer. Matins before dawn, lauds at sunrise, prime in the early morning, terce at mid-morning, sext at noon, none in mid-afternoon, vespers at sunset, compline before bed. 8 times a day, the bells ring. 8 times a day, Thomas stops his work, brushes the soil from his hands, and joins his brothers in the chapel. He leaves only for prayers and for meals. The midday meal after sext is the main food of the day. The evening meal after vespers is lighter. Both are taken in silence while one brother reads from the Rule of St. Benedict, or from the Lives of the Saints. Thomas eats efficiently, his mind already on the afternoon's work. The food is simple but adequate. Bread, pottage, vegetables, cheese, fish on some days, meat on feast days. The monks don't starve, but neither do they feast. Balance. in all things. By late spring, Thomas's hands are always stained now, brown and green and impossible to fully clean. The staining doesn't bother him. In a way, he's proud of it. It's evidence of his work, his vocation. His back always aches, especially in the evening after a full day of bending and kneeling and digging. His knees are stiff, sometimes painful. But the garden is thriving. The beds are full of vigorous growth. The plants are healthy, well spaced, properly staked, adequately watered. He feels the satisfaction of work done well, of a garden properly tended, of knowledge applied with skill. This is enough. This is more than enough. June arrives, and with it the true abundance of the garden. Everything that was planted, everything that survived the winter, everything that struggled through spring's unpredictable weather, the occasional late frost, the cold rain that delayed germination, the week of unseasonable heat that stressed the young seedlings, now grows with exuberant enthusiasm. The garden is full, perhaps too full. Plants that were given generous spacing in April now touch each other, their leaves overlapping, competing for light. The beds are lush, almost jungle-like in their density. This is the time of first major harvests. Not just the quick cuts for the kitchen that have been happening since early spring, though those continue, increasing in frequency as more plants reach harvesting size. But the serious harvesting, the collecting of plant material that will be dried and stored for use throughout the year, the building of the monastery's medical and culinary reserves. Thomas rises even earlier now. The best time for harvesting most herbs is early morning, after the dew has dried, but before the sun grows hot. This is traditional knowledge confirmed by experience. This is when the plant's essential oils are most concentrated. This is when their medicinal and culinary qualities are at their peak. The reasoning, explained to Thomas by Brother Anselm many years ago, goes like this. During the day, as the sun beats down, the volatile compounds in the plants, the ones that give them their characteristic scents and much of their medicinal value, are driven off by heat. You can smell this happening. Walk through the garden at midday in summer, and the air is thick with herbal scents. Those scents are literally the medicinal compounds evaporating. By late afternoon, the plants smell less strongly. They've lost some of their virtue to the air. But overnight, as the plants rest in cool darkness, these compounds are replenished, drawn up from the roots, synthesized in the leaves. By early morning, the plants are at their peak. Wait too long until the sun is high and hot, and you're harvesting depleted plants. Harvest in the sweet spot, morning after dew but before heat, and you get maximum quality. So Thomas rises in the pre-dawn darkness. He attends matins and lauds, then walks to the garden as the world lightens. The grass is wet with dew. The air is cool, almost cold. The garden waits, silent, except for the birds, just beginning their morning songs. He starts with the mints. The garden has several varieties: spearmint, with its bright, clean flavor; peppermint, stronger and more medicinal; water mint from the dampest beds; pennyroyal, used more for keeping pests away than for culinary purposes. The mints grow in the bed near the well, where their roots can stay constantly moist. Mint is an aggressive grower, spreading through underground runners that travel through soil, appearing sometimes a foot or more from the parent plant. Thomas has to be vigilant to keep it from taking over. He's learned to plant mint in areas bounded by solid barriers: the well on one side, a stone path on another, a woven fence on a third. But the monks use a lot of mint. Fresh mint in summer for flavoring dishes, especially the bland potages that make up much of their diet. Fresh mint in drinking water on hot days. Fresh mint strewn on floors to sweeten the air in living quarters. Dried mint in winter for teas that warm and comfort. Mint for stomach aches, for headaches, for bad breath. The plant is invaluable, worth the effort to contain it. Thomas cuts the mint stems about halfway down, leaving plenty of growth for the plant to recover. The cut stems, each about 8 inches to a foot long, go into a large willow basket. He works steadily, methodically, cutting stem after stem. The smell of mint rises around him, sharp and refreshing, almost overwhelming in its intensity. His hands will smell of it for hours, no matter how much he washes them. The scent will linger in his robe. He doesn't mind. It's pleasant, clean, alive. When the basket is full, and it takes a lot of mint stems to fill a basket, mint is light, mostly air. He carries it to the monastery's drying shed. This is a simple wooden structure, perhaps 10 feet by 12 feet, with slatted walls that allow air to circulate freely. The slats are angled downward, like louvers, keeping out rain while permitting airflow. The roof is wooden shingles, waterproof but not sealed. Inside, racks made of woven willow hold drying herbs at various stages. Thomas spreads the mint stems out loosely on empty racks, making sure they don't overlap too much. Good air circulation is essential for proper drying. If the herbs are packed too densely, if air can't move freely around them, they'll mold soil rather than dry. Mold ruins the herbs, makes them unusable. Thomas has lost entire harvests to mold in his early years, before he learned proper drying technique. Now he's careful. Better to use more rack space and dry the herbs properly than to pack them tightly and risk losing everything. The drying shed is Brother Thomas's particular domain during summer. He checks it multiple times daily, turning the drying herbs so all sides are exposed to air, removing any stems that show signs of mold or insect damage, moving finished batches to storage and adding new harvests. It's hot work in summer. The shed has no ventilation except the slatted walls, and the sun beating on the wooden roof raises the interior temperature considerably. By afternoon, it can be sweltering inside. Thomas doesn't linger during the heat of the day. He does his checking in morning and evening when it's cooler. But this is how it's done. This is how it's always been done, at least as long as anyone at the monastery can remember. The herbs must be dried to preserve them. Fresh herbs spoil within days, especially in warm weather. Dried herbs, stored properly in sealed containers, away from light and moisture, last months or even years. The difference between abundance and scarcity, between health and illness, between comfort and suffering. After the mints come the flowering herbs. Many plants are harvested when they begin to bloom. This is when their medicinal properties are thought to be strongest, when the plant's energy is moving upwards into flowers and seeds, when the concentration of active compounds peaks. Lavender blooms in late June, covering its grey-green bushes with spikes of purple-blue flowers. The bees love it, covering the plants whenever the sun is out, their humming audible from feet away. Thomas waits until the flower spikes are mostly open, with perhaps the top third of each spike still in bud. Then he cuts them on a dry afternoon, after any dew has dried, but before the heat has driven off the volatile oils. The scent is intoxicating. Lavender is one of those plants whose scent is complex. multi-layered. There's the immediate floral sweetness, but underneath there's something herbal, almost medicinal. Something calming. The scent affects Thomas's mood almost immediately, relaxing something in his chest he didn't realize was tight. Lavender is useful in so many ways. The dried flowers go into sachets to scent linen and discourage moths. Lavender tea helps with headaches and nervous conditions. Lavender flower infused in oil, though the monastery doesn't have the equipment to produce true essential oil, can be rubbed on temples for headache relief or on burns to promote healing. Some people stuff pillows with lavender flowers to help with sleep. It's one of the most valued plants in the garden. The lavender stems are bundled together, about 20 stems per bundle, tied with string, and hung upside down from hooks in the drying shed's ceiling. They'll hang there for several weeks, slowly drying, filling the shed with their characteristic scent. Eventually, when completely dry, the flowers will be stripped from the stems and stored in ceramic jars, and the stems will be bundled for use as kindling. Even the stems are useful, burning slowly and releasing lavender scent into the air. St. John's wort blooms around the feast of St. John the Baptist. Late June, just past the summer solstice, the longest day of the year. The plant has cheerful yellow flowers with 5 petals and prominent stamens. When you crush the flowers between your fingers, they produce a red juice, almost like blood. This red juice is thought to be powerful medicine, useful for wounds, for melancholy, for nerve pain. The flower's appearance near the summer solstice, combined with its blood-red juice, gives it particular significance. The monks gather the flowering tops on St. John's Day itself, believing this timing enhances the plant's properties. Thomas harvests carefully, taking the flowering tops, the flowers and the upper few inches of stem and leaves. Cut lower, and you're wasting plant material, taking more than you need. Cut higher, taking only the flowers, and you're not getting enough of the stem where some of the medicinal compounds concentrate. Experience teaches the right balance. About 4 inches from the top. Enough stem to get the compounds, not so much that you're making unnecessary work. The St. John's wort goes into a basket, then into the drying shed like the other herbs. But Brother Raymond also prepares some of it immediately, while fresh, steeping the crushed flowers in oil to make St. John's wort oil, which is valued for nerve pain and for healing wounds. Thomas delivers the fresh harvest to Raymond, who works in the infirmary, pressing the flowers into a jar of oil. The oil will turn red over the next several weeks as it sits in sunlight, the red compounds leaching from the flowers. Then it will be strained and stored, ready for use. Chamomile blooms in waves throughout summer, starting in June and continuing into August. The small daisy-like flowers, white petals around yellow centers, are collected continuously. Chamomile tea is one of the most common medicines in the monastery's pharmacy. It calms upset stomachs. It helps with sleep. It eases anxiety. The monks drink it themselves when they're stressed or unwell. They give it to sick villagers who come seeking help. They use it for everything from teething infants to dying elders who need comfort in their final hours. Harvesting chamomile is tedious work. The flowers are small, perhaps an inch across. They must be picked individually, pinched off just below the flower head. You can't just cut the whole plant, you need the flowers specifically, without too much stem. So Thomas sits on a low, three-legged stool beside the chamomile bed, his basket beside him, and picks flower after flower after flower. His fingers move automatically after the first few minutes. Reach, pinch, drop in basket. Reach, pinch, drop in basket. The repetition is almost hypnotic. His mind wanders. He thinks about his father in the village, who he hasn't visited in several weeks. He thinks about Brother Anselm, dead now for 3 years, wondering if he would approve of how Thomas is managing the garden. He thinks about nothing in particular, just existing in the moment. The sun on his back, the smell of chamomile, the distant sound of bells marking the hours. It takes hours to fill the basket. But chamomile is light. A basket full of chamomile flowers seems like a lot. But when dried, it reduces to almost nothing. The flowers shrinking as their water content evaporates. Thomas knows he'll harvest chamomile every few days throughout summer, always chasing the new blooms, always trying to collect enough for winter's needs. Some years they have plenty. Some years they run short by February. And have to be sparing with it. You never know. You just collect what you can and hope it's enough. July brings the peak heat of summer. The garden requires water now, lots of it. Rain is unpredictable, and even when it comes, it's often not enough. A brief shower might wet the surface soil, but not penetrate deep enough to reach the roots. A longer rain is better, but those are becoming less frequent as summer deepens. Thomas waters every morning and evening now, when evaporation is minimal. He makes trip after trip to the well, hauling up the bucket, carrying it to the beds, applying the water carefully with the gourd dipper. The well is perhaps 20 feet deep. The bucket, when full, weighs perhaps 15 pounds. Multiply that by 30 or 40 trips per watering session twice a day, and you begin to understand the physical toll. This is heavy work. Thomas's shoulders ache from carrying the full buckets, from hauling the rope hand over hand to bring the bucket up from the dark depths of the well. His arms ache. His back aches. He's lost weight over the summer despite the adequate meals, the physical labor burning more calories than he consumes. By late summer, he'll be lean, almost gaunt, every muscle visible beneath his skin. But the work must be done. The plants must have water. Without it, they wilt, their growth stops, they may die. Some are more demanding than others. The Mediterranean herbs, rosemary, lavender, sage, can tolerate dry conditions remarkably well. They evolved in climates with long, dry summers. Their leaves are often small, sometimes covered with fine hairs, adaptations to conserve moisture. These plants Thomas waters less frequently, maybe every few days, checking the soil to make sure it hasn't become dust dry but not worrying too much. But plants from damper regions suffer without supplemental water. The mints wilt dramatically, their leaves drooping, their stems bending. The angelica, with its large leaves and hollow stems, droops pathetically. The comfrey's substantial leaves hang limply from their stems. These plants need water more frequently, sometimes daily during hot spells. Thomas prioritizes. Water the most sensitive plants daily. Water the moderately sensitive plants every few days. Let the drought-tolerant plants fend for themselves unless conditions become extreme. It's a calculated strategy, making the best use of limited resources, limited time, limited energy, limited water. Even in a wet climate like this, water can become the constraining factor in summer. August brings the harvest of seeds. Many herbs are grown primarily for their seeds rather than their leaves. Fennel seeds used in cooking and as medicine for digestive complaints. Dill seeds, similar uses. Coriander seeds, essential for the kitchen, used in bread and in various dishes. Caraway seeds, for bread and cheese. Anise seeds, for flavoring and for medicine. These plants were allowed to flower earlier in the summer. While Thomas was cutting back the leafy herbs to keep them productive, he left these seed-producing plants alone. They flowered, were pollinated by the bees, and now their seed heads are developing, drying on the stem, ripening toward harvest. The timing is critical. Too early, and the seeds aren't ripe. They'll be small, weak, perhaps not viable. Too late, and the seed heads will shatter, spilling their contents onto the ground before Thomas can collect them. The perfect moment is when the seeds are fully formed and hard, when they've turned from green to brown or grey or whatever their mature color is. But when the seed head hasn't yet begun to split open naturally. Thomas checks the seed plants daily in late summer, watching for signs of readiness. He looks for color change in the seeds. He touches the seed heads gently, feeling for hardness. Sometimes he'll shake a seed head slightly. If seeds fall free easily, it's past time for harvest. If they don't come loose at all, it's too early. When they're ready, and the window is usually just a few days, Thomas cuts the entire seed head, stem and all, and brings it to the drying shed. There, he lays the seed heads on large pieces of cloth spread on the floor. As the seed heads finish drying over the next week or two, the seeds fall free naturally. Eventually, Thomas gathers up the cloth corners, creating a bag, and pours the seeds into a basket, leaving behind the dried stems and chaff. Then comes winnowing. This is the process of separating seeds from chaff, the light papery material that surrounded them in the seed head. Thomas pours the mixed seeds and chaff slowly from one basket to another, doing this outdoors on a breezy day. The breeze catches the lighter chaff and blows it away, while the heavier seeds fall into the basket below. It takes several pourings to get the seeds reasonably clean. It's satisfying work, almost meditative like so much of gardening. The seeds make a gentle rattling sound as they fall from basket to basket. They're beautiful, each species distinctive. Fennel seeds are elongated, ribbed, pale green, fading to brown. Coriander seeds are round, about the size of peppercorns, pale tan. Anise seeds are tiny, curved, grey-green. Dill seeds are flat, oval, dark brown. These seeds are valuable. Some will be used in the kitchen and infirmary immediately. Some will be stored for winter use. Seeds store even better than dried leaves, lasting years if kept dry. Some will be saved for next year's planting. Some might even be traded to other monasteries, exchanging this monastery's abundant fennel seed harvest for another monastery's surplus of some seed Thomas needs. The network of monasteries across Europe functions partly through such exchanges, each institution's surplus balancing another's shortage. As August moves toward September, Thomas begins to think about the transition to autumn. The garden is still producing abundantly, but you can sense the change. The light is different, the sun's angle noticeably lower, the shadows longer. The nights are beginning to cool. Sometimes there's a hint of moisture in the morning air that wasn't there in July. The quality of the green in the leaves is changing, becoming darker, less vibrant. The work continues, but Thomas knows the peak has passed. Summer's abundance is cresting, will soon begin its decline into autumn. The plants know it too. Some are already setting seed, preparing for dormancy, drawing their energy back down into roots. The cycle turns, always turning. This too is part of the rhythm. For now, there are still harvests to bring in, still plants to tend, still the daily round of watering, weeding, observing. The work continues, as it always has, as it always will. The garden asks, and Thomas answers. This is the agreement, this is the life. September arrives with cooler nights, and the first hints of yellow in the leaves of the trees beyond the monastery walls. The oaks and beeches that dot the surrounding countryside are just beginning their slow transformation. The garden itself is still mostly green, still productive, but you can sense the change. The energy is different. The urgency of summer growth has passed. Now the plants begin to consolidate, to prepare, to turn their attention towards survival rather than expansion. Some herbs bloom late, providing a final flush of flowers before winter. Tansy produces its button-like yellow flowers in dense, flat-topped clusters. These will be dried for use against intestinal worms and insects. Tansy scattered among grain stores keeps weevils away. Hung in doorways discourages flies. The scent is strong, pungent, not entirely pleasant, sharp and almost bitter. But usefulness matters more than pleasantness, and tansy is undeniably useful. Yarrow continues flowering, as it has since midsummer. Its flat-topped white or pink flower clusters have been blooming for months, but they persist into autumn, still providing late nectar for the bees. Yarrow is valued primarily for stopping bleeding. A poultice of fresh yarrow leaves, crushed and applied to a wound, will help staunch blood flow remarkably quickly. The plant's Latin name, Achillea, refers to the hero Achilles, who supposedly used yarrow to treat his soldiers' wounds during the Trojan War. Thomas doesn't know if that story is true, but he knows yarrow works. He's seen it stop bleeding from cuts and scrapes countless times. The dried flowers are also made into tea for fevers and women's complaints. Brother Raymond keeps a large supply in the infirmary. Yarrow is one of those herbs that sees constant use, never quite depleted, but also never in surplus. The harvest work continues, but at a slower pace. The fevered urgency of midsummer has passed. Thomas still makes his round daily, still collects what needs collecting. But there's a different quality to the work now. A sense of completion rather than anticipation. A feeling of gathering in rather than launching forth. He harvests the last of the annual herbs before frost. The first frost could come any time now. Mid-September would be early, but not impossible. Late September or early October is more typical. But whenever it comes, it will kill the tender plants instantly. Basil, which has grown lush and full through summer, must be cut down completely before that happens. One cold night will turn it black and useless. Thomas takes everything: stems, leaves, flowers. Nothing is wasted. The best leaves are dried for winter use. The flowers, which appeared in late August, are also dried. They have some of the same flavor as the leaves. The stems, too woody to use as is, will be chopped and added to the compost heap, where they'll break down over the next year, contributing to next year's soil fertility. Basil loses much of its flavor when dried. The fresh, bright taste that makes summer meals special becomes muted, almost dusty. But dried basil is better than no basil at all. And in February, when the memory of summer has faded and the winter seems endless, even dusty basil in the pottage is a small comfort, a reminder that summer will return. The roots of some plants are harvested in autumn. This is traditional wisdom, observed by gardeners for centuries, maybe millennia. In autumn, as plants prepare for winter, they draw energy down into their roots, storing nutrients that will sustain them through the cold months. This makes autumn the ideal time for root harvest. The roots are at their peak, full of stored starches, sugars, medicinal compounds. Thomas digs up some of the elecampane roots. This requires serious effort. Elecampane has thick, substantial roots that go deep, anchoring the tall plant against summer winds. He uses a spade, one of the few metal tools in the garden, valuable and carefully maintained, and digs a circle around the plant, perhaps 2 feet in diameter, going down as deep as the spade blade reaches. Then, he works the spade under the root ball, levering it up, loosening it, trying not to damage the roots. It's slow work. The roots resist, clinging to the earth. His shoulders and back strain with the effort. Finally, with a satisfying release, the root cluster comes free, heavy and substantial, covered in dark soil. He carries the roots to the well and washes them, scrubbing away the soil with his hands and a coarse brush made from bundled twigs. The clean roots are pale, almost white, substantial as parsnips, but more fibrous. These will be taken to Brother Raymond, who will peel them, slice them thin, and candy them with honey. The process takes days, slowly cooking the root slices in honey until they're saturated with sweetness. The resulting confection is both medicine and treat, given for coughs and lung complaints. Children who come to the infirmary sick will actually take this medicine willingly, even eagerly. It's one of the few medicines that doesn't require forcing. Angelica roots are also harvested now. The plants are biennial. They grow leafy the first year, flower and produce seeds the second year, then die. The roots are best harvested at the end of the first year before the plant puts its energy into flowering, or at the very beginning of the second year before the flower stalk emerges. Thomas marks the plants he intends to harvest with small stakes, keeping track of which are first year and which are second year. He digs them up carefully, using the same technique as with elecampane. Angelica roots are valued for digestive complaints, for expelling gas, for stimulating appetite in invalids who've lost the will to eat. The roots are also used in beverages and sweets, though such luxuries are rare in the monastery. On feast days, thin slices of candied angelica root might appear as a delicacy. But this is exceptional, not routine. The digging is hard work. By the end of a day spent harvesting roots, Thomas's back aches more than usual. His hands develop fresh blisters despite their usual calluses, the spade handle rubbing in ways that normal garden work doesn't. His shoulders burn from the repetitive motion of digging, levering, lifting. But it needs doing. The harvest must be completed before the ground freezes, before winter makes digging impossible. Not all roots are harvested, of course. Many perennial herbs are left undisturbed, their roots growing larger year by year, anchoring the plants more firmly, storing more nutrients. The sage bushes stay in place. They're woody shrubs now, not herbaceous plants, and you don't dig up shrubs unless you're removing them entirely. The lavender plants remain, their roots going deeper each year. The thyme cushions continue spreading slowly across their beds, their fibrous roots holding the soil. These plants will survive winter underground, their roots protected by soil and later by snow. They'll emerge again in spring, perhaps a little larger, a little more established. Some of them will outlive Thomas. The lavender he planted as small cuttings 10 years ago might live another 10 or 20 years, providing harvests long after he's gone. This is one of the satisfactions of perennial gardening. You're not just growing for this year, but for years to come. Thomas begins preparing the garden for winter. This is different work from the summer tasks. It's about protecting rather than growing, about consolidating rather than expanding, about accepting the coming dormancy rather than fighting it. He cuts back the dead tops of perennial plants, the dried stems and leaves of plants that have finished flowering, that have set seed, that are now drawing their energy back down into roots. These can be removed. They serve no purpose over winter. Better to clear them away, make space, reduce hiding places for pests and diseases. The dried plant material is gathered and sorted. Some goes to the compost heap, most of it actually. But some, if it's from medicinal plants and still contains useful properties, goes to the drying shed. Dead-looking stems might still have value. The woody stems of lavender, for instance, burn slowly and release pleasant scent. The seed heads of some plants, even after the seeds are gone, have uses. Teasel heads for textile work, poppy heads for decoration or for extracting the last bits of seed. The annual herbs that have finished their life cycle are pulled up entirely, roots and all. Their season is done. They've flowered, set seed, and now they're dying, yellowing, becoming brittle. Thomas pulls them up, shakes as much soil as possible from their roots. No sense removing soil from the beds unnecessarily, then adds the plant debris to the compost pile. More material for next year's fertility. He weeds thoroughly one last time. This is important. The weeds that survive winter, that establish themselves firmly before the cold comes, will be much harder to deal with in spring. Better to remove them now, before they can dig in deeper, before they can set late-season seeds that will germinate next year. Thomas spends several days on this final weeding, going through every bed systematically, pulling everything that isn't supposed to be there. The pulled weeds join everything else on the compost heap, which is growing substantially as autumn cleanup progresses. The pile steams more vigorously now, all the fresh green material decomposing rapidly, generating heat. On cold mornings, the steam rising from the compost heap is impressive, visible from across the monastery grounds. The pile is alive with decomposition, with transformation, with the breaking down of complex materials into simpler ones that plants can use. The beds that will be replanted next spring get a layer of compost now. Thomas spreads the finished compost from the far end of the pile, the dark, crumbly material that's been decomposing for a year or more, across the soil surface. He doesn't dig it in. Winter's freeze-thaw cycles will help incorporate it naturally, and digging now might damage the roots of nearby perennials. The layer of compost, perhaps 2 inches thick, will protect the soil from erosion during winter rains, suppress any late germinating weeds, and slowly release nutrients into the soil. October arrives with its particular beauty. The trees beyond the monastery walls are brilliant with color now. Gold, orange, red, rust. The garden itself is mostly brown. the green fading steadily. The harvests are nearly complete. The preparations are well advanced. Thomas's work shifts toward maintenance and observation rather than active cultivation. He checks the drainage in the garden paths. Standing water in winter can be problematic. It can damage plant roots if it pools around them. It can create muddy, difficult conditions that make accessing the beds nearly impossible. He looks for low spots where water might accumulate and fills them with gravel from the monastery's stores. He clears the small drainage channels that carry water away from the garden toward the stream. Leaves, plant debris, and soil have accumulated in these channels over the summer, partially blocking them. Thomas clears them out, ensuring water will flow freely. He clears fallen leaves that have blown in from the surrounding trees. A few leaves are fine. They'll break down over winter, adding organic matter to the soil. But too many can be problematic, especially if they mat down when wet. A thick mat of wet leaves can smother low-growing plants, can harbor slugs and other pests, can encourage fungal diseases. Thomas rakes the excess leaves and adds them to the compost pile. More material. The pile seems to grow endlessly in autumn. The tools need attention before winter. Thomas has been using them hard all season. The spade, the hoe, the hand trowel, the pruning knife, the baskets, the buckets. Now, before winter comes, everything needs to be cleaned, repaired if necessary, and properly stored. He cleans each implement carefully, scraping off dried soil and plant residue. The metal tools, spade, hoe, knife, get special attention. He scrubs them with sand and water, removing all soil, then dries them thoroughly. Metal left damp will rust over winter, weakening it, making it brittle. Once clean and dry, Thomas rubs the metal surfaces with a cloth that's been soaked in oil. This protective coating will help prevent rust during the damp winter months. Wooden handles are checked for splinters or cracks. A handle that's developing a crack needs attention now, before the crack spreads and the handle breaks at an inconvenient moment mid-season next year. Thomas uses a knife to smooth any rough spots, then rubs the wood with oil as well, keeping it from drying out and cracking further. The baskets are inspected. Willow baskets don't last forever, maybe 5 years of hard use before they start falling apart. Thomas looks for broken ribs, loose weaving, places where the basket is losing its structural integrity. Minor damage he can repair himself, reweaving sections, adding new ribs. Major damage means the basket needs replacing, and Thomas will spend some winter evenings weaving a new one to have ready for spring. Everything is then stored in the tool shed, arranged neatly, each tool in its place. The spade stands in one corner. The hoe leans beside it. The smaller tools hang from wooden pegs driven into the walls. The baskets stack in one corner. Order. Organization. Everything where it belongs, ready to be found quickly when needed. The seeds saved for next year's planting are stored in clay pots with tight-fitting lids. Each pot is labeled. A simple scratch in the clay or a piece of parchment tied to the pot with string, marked in charcoal or ink. Thomas organizes them on shelves in the tool shed, where they'll stay cool and dry through winter. Cool and dry, these are the essential conditions for seed storage. Too warm and the seeds might break dormancy prematurely. Too damp and they might mold or rot. Cool and dry keeps them viable until spring planting. Thomas makes a final inventory. This is partly for practical purposes, knowing what needs to be replaced, what needs attention, what succeeded this year and what failed. But it's also a kind of ritual, a formal closing of the season, an acknowledgement that one cycle has ended and another awaits. He walks through the garden with his wax tablet, making notes. What succeeded this year? The Xianju, the sage, had an excellent year, abundant and vigorous. The chamomile produced well, enough to see them through winter with some to spare. The mint, as always, grew enthusiastically, perhaps too enthusiastically. He'll need to be more aggressive about controlling its spread next year. What failed? The rosemary struggled, never really thriving. Perhaps that location is too cold, too exposed. Thomas considers moving it to a more sheltered spot against the wall. The woad didn't produce as much leaf as hoped. The soil in that bed might be exhausted, needing serious amendment. The hyssop developed some kind of fungal problem in late summer. He'll need to watch for that next year. Perhaps prune it more severely to improve air circulation. Which beds need more compost? The north bed, definitely. The plants there looked weak all season. The bed, where the annuals grow, might need refreshing too. Those plants take a lot from the soil. Which plants need dividing? The comfrey has become too crowded. Some of the chives have formed huge clumps that would benefit from division. The tansy is spreading too aggressively and needs to be constrained. Which plants need replacing? Several lavender plants are looking woody and unproductive. They might need to be replaced with young cuttings. One of the sage bushes died over summer, possibly from root rot. That will need a new plant. Some gaps have appeared in various beds where plants died for unknown reasons. These need filling. All of this gets scratched onto the wax tablet. This information will guide next spring's work. Thomas will review these notes as a winter ends and planning begins, using this year's experience to inform next year's choices. This is how knowledge accumulates, how practices improve. Observation, reflection, adjustment, repeat. The garden sleeps, or begins to. The perennial plants withdraw into their roots, drawing the last nutrients from their dying leaves, shutting down for winter. The bare beds wait, dark and quiet, empty of the summer's abundance. The paths are empty now, no longer bustling with kitchen brothers gathering ingredients or infirmary assistants collecting medicines. The gate stands closed most of the time, opened only when Thomas makes his daily checks. But Thomas still visits daily, even as autumn deepens toward winter. Even in dormancy, the garden needs checking. Unusual warm spells can bring some plants out of dormancy prematurely, which can damage them when the cold returns. Storms can damage structures, fences blown down, trellises collapsed, the shed's door blown open. Animals sometimes dig in the soft earth looking for roots or grubs. The vigilance never completely ends. Perhaps it lessens in intensity, but it doesn't stop. November brings the first hard frosts. Thomas wakes one morning to find the garden transformed. Every surface coated with white crystals. The frost is thick, covering everything. The paths, the bare beds, the remaining leaves on the perennial plants, the wooden fence posts, the shed roof. The sun rises, and the frost glitters like diamonds, like stars scattered across the earth. It's beautiful in a way summer never is. The stark simplicity of it, the reduction to essentials, earth, plant, frost, light. No distracting color, no abundance, just the fundamental structures revealed. Thomas walks through the frosted garden slowly. His breath makes clouds in the cold air. His footsteps crunch on the frozen paths. The frost-covered plants look almost magical. Each leaf outlined in white, each stem crystalline. But he knows what this means. Whatever tender growth remained is now finished. Winter has arrived. The growing season is definitively over. He doesn't mourn this. It's simply what happens. The wheel turns. The seasons flow one into another. Spring to summer, to autumn, to winter, to spring again. Endless, inevitable, beautiful in its reliability. The garden will rest now. And in a way, so will Thomas. Not that his work stops. There are still winter tasks, still maintenance, still planning. But the intensity eases. The daily urgency relaxes. He can breathe, reflect, rest, until spring comes again, and with it the renewal of work, of growth, of life. Winter in the monastery garden is not a time of complete cessation, despite appearances. To an outsider, the garden might look dead, brown earth, bare beds, skeletal plants. But life continues, just slowly, hidden, beneath the surface. The garden isn't dead, it's resting, gathering strength, waiting. Thomas still visits most days, though his winter routine is different from the growing seasons. He comes later, after prime, when there's enough light to see clearly. The pre-dawn darkness of winter is profound, and there's little point stumbling through the garden in the dark. He stays for shorter periods. There's less to do, but what needs doing is important. He walks the paths, observing, looking for storm damage. Winter storms can be fierce here. Strong winds, heavy rain, occasionally snow. Branches might fall from the trees beyond the garden and land on the beds. The woven fence sections might come loose, blown by wind. The shed roof might develop leaks. Thomas checks for all of this, making small repairs as needed. He looks for animal intrusions. Rabbits sometimes nibble bark from the shrubs in winter when other food is scarce. The bark of young lavender plants is particularly vulnerable. Thomas has learned to protect susceptible plants with small barriers of woven willow, creating cages around them that exclude rabbits while allowing air circulation. He checks these barriers, repairing any that have been damaged. Mice sometimes try to nest in the tool shed, attracted by the relative warmth and shelter. Thomas doesn't begrudge them the warmth exactly, but mice will gnaw on wooden tool handles, will nest in baskets, will soil stored materials with their droppings. He sets simple traps, wooden boxes with spring mechanisms that kill the mice instantly, and checks them regularly. Any caught mice go onto the compost pile. Everything returns to the soil eventually. He looks for erosion. Winter rain can be heavy, and water flowing across the garden can carve channels in the paths or wash soil from the beds. Thomas looks for these developing problems and addresses them early. A path that's starting to erode gets a layer of gravel or some flat stones placed strategically to redirect water flow. A bed where soil is washing away gets a small barrier of woven willow or stones to hold the soil in place. The weather is unpredictable, as it always is. Some days are cold and clear, the sky a brilliant blue, the frost staying thick on the ground until afternoon. The sunlight on these days has a particular quality. Bright but without warmth, beautiful but harsh. Everything seems sharper somehow, more defined. The garden's bare architecture is fully visible. The layout of the beds, the structure of the perennial plants, the bones of the place without its seasonal flesh. Other days are grey and wet, with cold rain falling steadily from low clouds. These are the days Thomas finds most challenging. The rain isn't usually heavy enough to prevent going out, but it's persistent, seeping through clothing, chilling you to the bone. Thomas makes his garden checks on these days as quickly as possible, then retreats to the warming room, one of the few heated spaces in the monastery. Occasionally, snow comes. Thomas loves these days, despite the cold. The garden transformed, softened, quieted even further beyond its usual winter quiet. The shapes simplified to their essentials. The beds are rounded mounds of white. The paths are smooth channels between them. The shed wears a white cap. The whole garden seems to glow softly even in dim light, the snow reflecting what little illumination exists. On snowy days, Thomas's visit is brief. He checks that the shed door is secure, that no damage has occurred, that everything is as it should be. Then he retreats to the monastery. There's inside work to do in winter. Seeds to sort through, removing any that look moldy or damaged, ensuring next year's planting stock is viable. Tools to repair more extensively than the quick fixes he does in the garden. Records to update. Brother Raymond, the infirmarian, keeps detailed records of which medicines are used throughout the year. Every patient who comes seeking help is noted. Every ailment is recorded. Every treatment is documented. In winter, Thomas reviews these records with Raymond, looking for patterns, planning for next year. They sit in the warming room, the fire crackling in the hearth, its light supplementing the weak winter daylight from the narrow windows. The room is one of the few places in the monastery that's consistently warm in winter. Most spaces are simply endured. Cold stone, cold air, cold everywhere. But the warming room has a fire, and the monks are permitted to gather here for brief periods to restore circulation to cold-numbed extremities. Thomas and Raymond sit at a rough table, parchment sheets spread before them. Raymond's handwriting is neat, practiced. He's spent years in the scriptorium before becoming infirmarian, and he writes with the precision of a trained scribe. Thomas's literacy is more basic. He can read simple texts, can write his own name and basic notes, but complex writing is beyond him. He's a gardener, not a scholar. His knowledge is in his hands, in his observations, not in written words. Chamomile, Raymond says, running his finger down a column of entries. We used a great deal this year. More than last year, certainly. Several elderly patients with digestive complaints. Many children with trouble sleeping. Some cases of nervous conditions among the monks themselves. Thomas nods. I collected as much as I could, every few days through the summer. The plants were productive. And yet we ran short in March, Raymond points out. We had to ration it for a few weeks until the new plants flowered. Thomas considers this. I could plant more. Perhaps double the bed size. But that means less space for something else. They discuss the trade-offs. More chamomile means less of something else. But what? What's least needed? They review other entries. The wormwood was barely used. Only a handful of cases requiring it all year. Perhaps that bed could be reduced. The mugwort similarly saw little use. These bitter, powerful herbs are needed rarely, and a small stock goes a long way. What about the feverfew? Thomas asks. We have abundance of that. The plant reseeds itself constantly. I'm always pulling up excess seedlings. Raymond checks his records. Feverfew, moderate use. Headaches primarily. Some women's complaints. Nothing that would require increasing production. If anything, we could reduce it, but... He pauses. But it's valuable. Best to maintain current levels. They continue through the records. Plantings to increase. Chamomile, definitely. Perhaps more mint. It's always needed for medicine and for kitchen use and for freshening rooms. More sage. Brother Raymond goes through substantial amounts treating sore throats and fevers. Plantings to decrease. Wormwood, mugwort, perhaps some of the more ornamental plants that have minimal medicinal value. This is how planning happens. Not theoretical, not based on abstract principles, but grounded in actual use, in observed need, in the practical reality of what gets used and what sits on shelves untouched. Midwinter brings the darkest days. The sun rises late and sets early. Even at midday, the light is weak, filtered through clouds, barely illuminating. The garden exists in twilight seemingly always, the shadows long even when the sun is at its highest point. Thomas sometimes feels the weight of this darkness. The cold seeps into his bones more easily now than it did when he was younger. His breath makes clouds even inside the unheated toolshed when he goes to check on stored materials. His fingers grow stiff in the cold, making fine work difficult. He wears his hands wrapped in cloth strips for warmth, but it's never quite enough. The monastery doesn't have glass for windows, just wooden shutters that can be closed against wind and rain, but that also block light. So indoor spaces are often nearly as cold as outdoors, with the exception of the warming room and the kitchen. But there's beauty in winter too, if you look for it. The architecture of the plants, usually hidden by abundant foliage, becomes visible. The branching structure of the sage bushes, the way each branch divides and subdivides, creating a complex but orderly pattern. The geometric form of the lavender plants, their woody stems radiating from a central point. The delicate tracery of dried fennel stems, their seeds long since harvested, but their skeletal beauty remaining. Frost patterns on the well bucket, different every morning. Ice crystals forming intricate designs on the iron spade left leaning against the wall. The tracks of birds crossing the snow-covered paths, sparrows mostly, looking for any seeds or insects they can find. The curved line where a mouse ran from one bed to another, its tiny feet leaving a dotted trail. These small moments of beauty sustain Thomas through the dark months. The monastery celebrates Christmas with more ceremony than most days receive. The chapel is decorated with holly and ivy, the only green available in winter. Their presence a promise of life continuing even in the darkest season. Special foods appear in the refectory, meat on this feast day, even though it's technically a day of fasting. Wine instead of weak ale. Honey-sweetened bread. The bells ring more frequently, their sound brighter somehow, more celebratory. Thomas attends all the Christmas services, standing with the other monks in the cold chapel, his breath visible in the candlelight, singing the ancient hymns. The music fills the stone space, dozens of male voices in unison, the Latin words praising the birth of Christ. There's something deeply moving about it. The darkness outside, the flickering candles inside, the voices rising together in song. But even on Christmas, Thomas visits the garden, just briefly, just to check, as he does most days. The habit is too strong to break, even for the highest holy day. And there's something appropriate about visiting the garden on Christ's birthday. This is where life is cultivated, where God's creation is tended with care, where the cycle of death and rebirth plays out year after year. If God can become incarnate in a human body, entering into the material world, then surely God is present here too, in this soil, these plants, this quiet work of growing things. After Christmas, the winter settles in more deeply. January is typically the coldest month, the darkest, the most challenging. The ground freezes solid, hard as stone. The well bucket sometimes emerges with a skin of ice forming on the water, despite the well's depth. Thomas must break the ice before he can dip water, if he needs water for some reason, which is rare in winter, but occasionally necessary. His breath fogs in the air constantly. His hands, even wrapped in cloth, ache with cold when he's outside for more than a few minutes. The monastery is cold too. The stone walls hold the cold, radiating it into every space. The monks sleep in unheated dormitories, under thin blankets that are never quite adequate. They wake in darkness to attend matins, the pre-dawn office, shivering in the cold chapel. But February brings the first hints of change. Subtle at first, almost imperceptible. But there, if you know to look for them, the days grow noticeably longer. The sun, though still weak, climbs slightly higher in the sky each day. The quality of the light changes, becomes somehow more hopeful. On milder days, you can sense something stirring. Not visible yet, not tangible, but present. The earth preparing to wake. Thomas begins to prepare too. He reviews his notes from last autumn, scratched on wax tablets, and then transferred to memory. He discusses plans with Brother Raymond, confirming what to plant more of, what to reduce. He inventories the stored seeds, checking their viability. Sometimes he'll test a few seeds of each type, placing them on damp cloth to see if they'll germinate. Old seeds lose viability over time, and it's better to discover this now than after wasting time planting dead seeds in spring. He repairs the last of the tools that need attention. A basket that needs reweaving. A hoe handle that needs replacing. Small tasks that couldn't be rushed during the growing season, but can be attended to now, in winter's slower pace. He organizes the drying shed, clearing out any remnants of last year's harvest that somehow got overlooked, making space for this year's abundance. Late February, early March. The snow melts during the day, though it refreezes at night. The freeze-thaw cycle that helps break down soil structure, that helps incorporate the compost spread on the beds last autumn, that prepares the earth for new growth. The garden begins its annual transformation from dormancy to activity. Thomas watches for the first signs of green. They come earlier than you might expect, even while patches of snow still linger in shaded corners. The snowdrops appear first, white and delicate, pushing through the cold earth. They're not part of the herb garden proper, but they grow along its edges, at the base of the wall, and Thomas welcomes them. They're a promise, a reminder. Winter ends, spring returns. The cycle continues, always, inevitably, beautifully. The green tips of the perennial bulbs begin to show. Garlic, planted last autumn, sends up shoots, bright green against the brown earth, full of vigor. The chives push through the soil in tight clusters, their tubular leaves unmistakable. The perennial herbs stir in their beds, preparing to leaf out. If you dig carefully, and Thomas does, checking one plant to see, you can see tiny buds on the woody stems of the sage, ready to open when conditions are right. And Thomas, who has been patient through the long winter, who has endured the cold and darkness, who has maintained his vigilance even when there seemed little to watch over, feels a rising anticipation. Soon, very soon now, the real work will begin again. Soon the garden will wake fully, soon the cycle will turn once more, from dormancy through growth to abundance and back to rest. He stands in the garden on a late February afternoon. The sun weak but present. The air still cold, but with a hint of warmth in it when you stand in a sheltered spot. The beds wait, patient, ready. The perennial plants prepare to burst forth. The seeds in the tool shed await their planting. Everything is poised, balanced, at the cusp of transformation. Thomas closes his eyes, breathes deeply, smells the earth, the slight sweetness that comes when frozen ground begins to thaw, feels the sun on his face, weak but present, hears the birds, returning now, their songs tentative but hopeful. Spring is coming. The garden knows it. Thomas knows it. The work will begin again. The cycle will continue. Life will return in its annual miracle of renewal. He's ready. The garden is ready. The time approaches. We've come full circle now. Back to early spring. Back to where we began. Though so much time has passed. A full year in the garden. 52 weeks of work, of observation, of patient tending. 4 seasons flowing one into another, each with its character, its tasks, its rewards and challenges. You understand more now than when we started. You've seen the full year unfold. You've watched the work change with the seasons. You've spent time with Brother Thomas, with his plants, with the quiet rhythm of the garden. You've been here through the cold spring mornings, the abundant summer, the slowing autumn, the quiet winter. You've seen it all. Let's reflect on what this life means. Not just the practical aspects, the planting schedules, the harvesting techniques, the medicinal uses, but the deeper significance. What does it mean to tend a garden year after year? What does this work do to a person? How does it shape your understanding of life, of time, of yourself? Brother Thomas has been herbarius for 15 years now. Before him was Brother Anselm, who held the position for perhaps 20 years, maybe longer. The records aren't precise about such things, and memory fades. Before Anselm was Brother Martin, whose tenure is even less clear, but was certainly substantial. And before Martin, others whose names are lost now, but whose work continues in the plants they selected, the beds they established, the practices they refined. The garden itself predates all of them. It was established when the monastery was founded, 50 or 60 years ago. Some of the perennial plants, a few of the oldest lavender bushes, the ancient sage that grows near the gate, perhaps some of the comfrey, might date back to that original planting. They have outlived their planters. They'll outlive Thomas. They might outlive the monastery itself, if circumstances somehow led to the monastery's abandonment. Plants are patient. Plants persist. This continuity matters deeply. This is work that connects generations. that transcends individual lifetimes. When Thomas plants a perennial herb, he's not just planting for this year's harvest, or even next year's. He's planting for 5 years, 10 years, perhaps decades of harvests. The sage bush he planted as a small cutting 10 years ago is now substantial, woody, providing abundant leaves for the infirmary. It will continue producing long after Thomas is gone, tended by whoever comes after him. When Thomas saves seeds, he's participating in a chain of cultivation that stretches back centuries, perhaps millennia. The sage seeds he saves this year are descendants of sage plants grown by generations of gardeners before him. Each year's seeds carry the accumulated adaptation of countless seasons. The strongest plants survived and produced seed. The most productive plants were selected for seed saving. The plants that survived droughts, floods, harsh winters, their genes persist. This is living history. This is evolution guided by human hands, but still fundamentally the plant's own story. This is knowledge encoded not in books, but in the plants themselves. And Thomas is a keeper of that knowledge. A link in the chain. He received the garden from Brother Anselm. He'll pass it on to whoever comes after him. The plants are the continuity, the living text that preserves information across generations. The work teaches patience. You cannot hurry a plant. You cannot force it to grow faster than its nature allows. You can provide good conditions, rich soil, adequate water, proper spacing, protection from pests. But ultimately, growth happens in its own time. The seed germinates when it's ready, when some internal clock says the conditions are right. The plant flowers when it's ready, responding to day length or temperature or some combination of factors you don't fully understand. The seeds ripen when they're ready, following their own schedule. Lavender take 3 years to become productive. Why must everything take so long? But over time, he learned to work with natural rhythms rather than against them. He learned to observe rather than control. He learned that trying to force outcomes usually ends poorly. Plants push too hard, produce weak growth, become more susceptible to disease, often fail entirely. Now, after 15 years, Thomas has a kind of patience that extends beyond the garden. He's less likely to rush anything, less likely to demand immediate results, more willing to trust in slow processes, in the gradual unfolding of things in their own time. This patience is a gift the garden has given him, though he might not articulate it quite that way. The work also teaches humility. No matter how skilled you are, how knowledgeable, how experienced, some things are beyond your control. The weather, primarily. A late frost that kills tender seedlings. A drought that no amount of watering can fully compensate for. Heavy rains that flatten plants, that wash away soil, that bring fungal diseases. Hail that shreds leaves. Storms that break branches. You do your best. You apply all your knowledge. And sometimes the plants thrive despite challenges. And sometimes they fail despite your best efforts. Thomas has experienced many failures over the years. The year a late frost killed all the basil seedlings, and he had to start over, losing weeks of growing season. The year slugs devastated the lettuce, despite his vigilant handpicking, despite the barriers he erected, despite everything he tried. The year the drought was so severe that even his constant watering couldn't save the moisture-loving herbs, and he watched helplessly as they wilted and died. The year some unknown disease swept through the fennel, turning the leaves brown and killing half the plants before it mysteriously stopped. These failures hurt. You invest time, effort, hope in plants, and when they fail, there's genuine grief. But the failures also taught Thomas resilience. You acknowledge the loss. You learn what you can from it. Was there something you could have done differently? Or was this simply bad luck? Then you move forward. There's always next season, always another chance. The garden offers endless opportunities for renewal, for trying again. The work teaches observation. To be a good gardener, you must pay attention, real attention. Not glancing at the garden while your mind is elsewhere, but truly observing. Noticing the subtle yellowing of leaves that indicates nutrient deficiency before it becomes severe. Seeing the small holes in leaves that indicate insect feeding before the infestation gets out of hand. Sensing the slight wilting that means water stress before the plant reaches the point of permanent damage. Reading the sky for signs of coming weather. Feeling the soil to know its moisture level. Smelling the air for the scent of rain approaching or frost coming. This skill of observation, developed through years of gardening, transfers to other areas of life. Thomas notices things others miss. A brother who's unusually quiet, possibly troubled by something. A change in the quality of the light that indicates weather shifting. Small shifts in the monastery's routines that might indicate larger changes coming. The slight loosening of a stone in the wall that, if not addressed, might eventually cause a larger collapse. The garden has made Thomas attentive, present, aware. This is not something he consciously cultivated. It grew naturally from the work, from the necessity of paying attention to live things that depend on you. The work org provides something less tangible, but equally valuable. Purpose. Thomas knows why he rises before dawn every day. He knows why his back aches and his hands are permanently stained. He's providing medicine for the sick. Food that makes simple meals more palatable and nutritious. Beauty and order in a small corner of the world. His work has meaning beyond himself. It serves the monastery. It serves the sick villagers who come seeking help. It serves the continuity of knowledge, passing on the accumulated wisdom of generations. Many people struggle to find this sense of purpose. They perform tasks that feel arbitrary, disconnected from any larger meaning. Work that seems to benefit no one, or that serves purposes they don't understand or care about. Thomas doesn't have this problem. Every weed he pulls protects the useful plants, allowing them to thrive. Every seed he plants is an investment in future healing, future nourishment. Every day in the garden is another contribution to the monastery's mission of prayer, hospitality, and care for the sick. There's also the simple satisfaction of skilled work. Thomas is good at what he does. He knows it. Not with arrogance, that would be a sin of pride, but with the quiet confidence that comes from years of practice, from demonstrated competence. He knows how to read the soil, understanding by touch and smell whether it needs more organic matter or is well balanced. He knows how to judge when seeds are ready for harvest, recognizing the precise moment of ripeness. He knows how to recognize the early signs of plant stress and respond appropriately. This expertise feels good. It's something he's earned through dedication and attention, through years of small failures and gradual improvements. When Brother Raymond praises the quality of an herbal harvest, when the kitchen brother comments that this year's mint is particularly flavorful, when the abbot walks through the garden and nods approvingly at the orderly beds. These moments of recognition matter. They validate the work. They confirm that Thomas is fulfilling his role well. And then there's the garden itself, the place. Thomas loves it. Not in a sentimental way, not with flowery language or emotional displays, but in the way you love something you know deeply, completely, intimately. He knows every bed, every path, every plant. He knows where the sun lingers longest in summer and where frost arrives first in autumn. He knows which corner stays dampest after rain and which dries out fastest. He knows where the soil is richest and where it needs constant amendment. This intimate knowledge of place is increasingly rare. Even in medieval times when people generally travel less than they will in later centuries. Many monks come from distant regions, assigned to this monastery by their order's hierarchy. They might serve here 10 years, then be reassigned elsewhere. They never develop deep roots. Thomas is different. He's from a village just a few miles away. His father still lives there. His childhood home is visible from the monastery's bell tower. He's never lived anywhere else. He'll almost certainly die here. This rootedness shapes everything. Thomas doesn't just work in the garden. He belongs to it as much as the plants do. He's part of its ecology, its history, its future. When he walks the paths, his feet follow grooves worn partly by his own passage, year after year. When he reaches for a tool, his hand knows exactly where it hangs, because he's the one who hung it there, who's reached for it 1,000 times before. There's a meditation in this, a sense of being thoroughly, completely present in a place. Not passing through, not visiting, not temporarily assigned, but belonging, being of this place, shaped by it, shaping it in turn. As we watch Thomas begin another spring, the 16th spring of his tenure as herbarius, we understand that we're watching something timeless. The specific details are medieval. The monastery, the Latin prayers, the particular herbs valued for their traditional uses, the absence of modern tools and knowledge. But the essential reality is universal, stretching across cultures and centuries. Someone tends the garden, someone cares for the plants, someone maintains the knowledge and passes it on. This has been true for as long as humans have cultivated plants. 10,000 years at least, since agriculture began in the Fertile Crescent in China in Mesoamerica. In every culture, every climate, every era, someone has done this work. The tools change. Bronze hoes give way to iron ones, which will eventually give way to steel. Wooden buckets will be replaced by metal ones, then by irrigation systems. The specific plants change. New crops are discovered, old ones fall out of favor. Herbs from the Americas will eventually reach Europe, transforming gardens like this one. The reasons for cultivation shift. Medicinal uses that seem essential now will be abandoned as medical knowledge advances. Culinary preferences will change, but the fundamental work remains. Someone plants, someone tends, someone harvests, someone preserves, someone plans for next season, someone passes knowledge to the next person who will do this work. And in doing this simple work, year after year, season after season, that person participates in something larger than themselves, something that connects past and future, something that sustains life, that maintains beauty, that preserves knowledge, something fundamentally human, the impulse to cultivate, to improve, to tend the earth. Brother Thomas kneels in the early spring soil. his fingers working compost into a prepared bed. He's 40 years old now, perhaps 41. He's not certain of his exact age, as birth dates weren't always recorded carefully among peasant families. His body aches in ways it didn't when he was younger. His vision isn't quite as sharp. His stamina isn't what it once was. But his knowledge is deeper. His understanding is richer. His hands know what to do without conscious thought. The sun warms his back. A bird sings somewhere beyond the wall. A blackbird, by the sound of it. One of the first to return in spring. The garden waits, ready to grow again. The perennial plants are stirring. The beds are prepared. The seeds are stored and viable. Everything is poised for another season of growth. Thomas stands slowly, brushing soil from his knees. There's more work to do. There's always more work to do. But that's not a complaint. That's just the truth. That's the nature of gardens, the nature of life. Work doesn't end. Tasks don't get completed once and for all. You simply do what needs doing today. And tomorrow there will be more. He picks up his basket and moves to the next bed. The rhythm continues. The cycle turns. The seasons flow, one into another, endlessly, beautifully, inevitably. Spring to summer, to autumn, to winter, to spring again. Growth to abundance, to rest to renewal. Always moving, always changing, always somehow the same. And somewhere in the future, generations from now, another gardener will kneel in this same soil. The monastery might still stand, or might be ruins. The specific plants might be different. The tools might be unrecognizably advanced. But the essential work will be the same. Someone will tend these beds, will plant and weed and harvest, will observe the seasons turning, will find meaning and purpose in the simple act of growing things. The work continues. The garden endures. The knowledge passes from hand to hand, generation to generation. An unbroken chain of cultivation stretching from the distant past into the unknowable future. As we come to the end of our time in this medieval garden, let's sit quietly for a moment. Perhaps you're nearly asleep now. Perhaps you've been drifting in and out, hearing some parts clearly and others from a distance, like memories half remembered. That's fine. That's perfect, actually. That's the purpose of this. Not to keep you alert and engaged, but to let you rest. To give your mind something gentle to follow. A quiet voice speaking of quiet things. A rhythm that matches the rhythm of rest. The garden we visited exists in memory and imagination now. The specific monastery we described, somewhere in France around 1320, may never have existed exactly as portrayed. The details are drawn from historical records, from archaeological evidence, from medieval herbals and agricultural manuals, but assembled into a narrative that's more truth than fact, if that makes sense. Brother Thomas himself is a fiction, a composite of many gardeners across many centuries. But gardens very much like this one did exist, hundreds of them, thousands of them. Throughout medieval Europe and beyond, every monastery of any size had an herb garden, every castle, every prosperous household. The knowledge we've discussed was real knowledge, passed down through generations, written in Latin texts and vernacular manuscripts, but mostly preserved in practice, in the movements of hands that knew what to do. Those gardens are gone now. The beds have been built over or allowed to return to wild growth. The monasteries themselves are often ruins or museums. The gardeners are centuries dead, their names mostly forgotten, their individual stories lost. Brother Anselm, Brother Martin, all the others whose names we never learned. Gone. But the knowledge persists. The plants persist. Many of the herbs Brother Thomas tended are still grown today, still valued for the same properties. Lavender for calm and sleep, chamomile for digestion and peace, sage for, well, the name says it all. Sage, wisdom, the plant that preserves memory, that clarifies thought, still used, still valued. The continuity is remarkable when you think about it. And the work persists. Somewhere right now, in this very moment, someone is tending an herb garden. The tools are different. Metal, not wood. Plastic, not willow. The knowledge is different, backed by chemistry and biology, not the doctrine of signatures. But the fundamental relationship with growing things remains. The same patience, the same observation, the same satisfaction in work done well, the same connection to the seasons, to the earth, to the cycles of growth and rest. Time flows like water. The medieval period becomes the Renaissance, becomes the Enlightenment, becomes the modern era. Monarchies fall. Technologies advance at dizzying speed. The world transforms again and again, each generation barely recognizing the world their grandparents knew. But some things remain constant. Seeds germinate. Plants grow. Gardeners tend. The wheel turns. If you're still awake, take a deep breath. Let it out slowly. You've spent these hours in a quiet place, a peaceful place, a place where the work is simple and meaningful, where the rhythm is gentle, where the seasons turn as they always have, as they always will. Let that calm settle into you now. Let the detailed attention to small things remind you that life doesn't have to be rushed, doesn't have to be dramatic, can be found in the quiet work of tending what matters. If you're asleep, well, you won't hear this. But perhaps on some level, the calm has settled into you anyway. The slow pace, the gentle repetition, the sense that life has patterns and purposes, that even small work matters, that someone somewhere is tending the garden and all is well. Thank you for spending this time in the garden, for walking the paths with Brother Thomas, for learning about the herbs and their uses, for allowing yourself to slow down, to rest, to simply be present with this quiet history, for trusting that not everything needs to be exciting or dramatic, that there's beauty and meaning in the ordinary, in the repeated, in the simple work of caring for growing things. The fire crackles on, steady and warm. The garden sleeps or grows, depending on the season, but it endures. The work continues, as it always has. Brother Thomas tends his beds. The plants reach toward the sun. The seeds wait in the soil. The seasons turn, and you can rest now. You can let go. You can sleep.